and they basically live an existence in harmony with nature. So it's logical to think that at one point most humans, if not all humans, were at that stage of living in harmony with nature. Now we have to look at some historical, geological events, such as the end of the Ice Age and the Lesser Dryad. Okay, the Ice Age ended, it became warm, there was an expansion of territory which could be used for hunting and gathering, and there was a greater variety of food. This caused an expansion of the population of humans. Then a large chunk of ice fell off, floated down, cooled the world, and you had the Lesser Dryad. That basically was a mini Ice Age, which caused a constriction of the areas of food gathering, and therefore a problem for these greater populations. Somewhere around that time, possibly in various areas, agriculture was born. An interesting archaeological find was in the area of Israel, certainly the Middle East, Palestine, Israel, that we get into political, you've got to remember, prior to the time that I'm about to explain, humans didn't have that sense of boundaries, nations, or ownership. They lived in tune. They had territory that they lived in. There may have been conflict over control of territory, but generally that would have been solved by people moving away. I mean, as most humans in some way would have been related back at that particular time, there wouldn't have been so many tribal conflicts, although we have seen that chimpanzees, even relatives, there have been examples of groups fighting against groups, and very interestingly with tactics and sticks, and very scary to think that in fact we're not unique. This may go against a lot of religious thought. Hell, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to wake you up, guys. Okay, I'm not saying there isn't a God. I'm saying your concept of a God is man-made. Okay, now back to the Garden of Eden. So, at a certain point, humanity was forced to stop living in harmony because the natural resources of the area could no longer support that kind of nomadic existence. Would be you would live in one place for a period of time, possibly a year, okay, and move on to another and another, possibly in a radius of maybe 10 miles, 10 kilometers, something like that. You would follow a circle. So after a certain number of years, you would return to the same point. Okay. Each year, you would go out, hunt, gather, depending on the seasonal availability, okay, and prepare for the winter. This also comes into some of the pre-Christian and pre-civilization. I mean, so you will remember that Christmas has a lot of Germanic influence, and they weren't Christians. A lot of that Christmas stuff comes from Germanic paganism and their preparation for the winter festivals or the winter period. Okay, but I've talked about that in my Christmas video some way back if you want to go into detail. What's called the agricultural revolution, some people refer to as the Neolithic revolution, but the Neolithic really refers more to the greater extensive use of stone, whereas the agricultural revolution is when our early ancestors discovered that they could control nature. The problem with controlling nature was that they actually became tied to the land, and there was a concept of owning land. Okay. Now, prior to this, in small nomadic bands, there was no concept of ownership other than that of the group. There was no concept of individual ownership. Okay. What happened with the creation of the concept of ownership of land was that the humans were then enslaved to that land, having to work it. Whereas prior to that, they just went out and picked from the trees. The nomadic people generally only spent 4 hours a day maximum in their work. The rest was in socializing. Okay? Agricultural society generally meant a full day, waking up very early in the morning, go to bed very late at night, in work. Just put this into concept as well. I want to point this out, I should say. The early hunter-gatherers probably had fewer children, certainly had fewer children. Generally, the mother would keep her child until the child was about 7 years old before having a second child. With the agricultural revolution, that stopped. Women became baby-making machines. Don't want to say anything about Catholic religion, but religion in a sense is go forth and multiply. Yeah. Produce more babies. Why? Why produce more babies? Because we need more people to work the fields. And of course, times are harder, so we've got people over there. We need to defend ourselves. We need to conquer. We need armies. We need to produce. We have a more complex society. So we build a hierarchical structure. Where does this fit in with the apple? The knowledge of right and wrong, good and bad, evil, good, rights and non-rights. Ownership is a set of rights. When a society arrived at the point where everybody owned the land, and the sense of they were enslaved to the land to free themselves, certain people put themselves above, therefore saying they had greater rights than the mass who worked the land. The hierarchical structure, the sense of knowing rights and wrongs or non-rights. The knowledge of right and not right. Stepping this forward in humanity, we get very complicated legal codes involved in our economic system and our ownership rights of property and people. You have to understand that servitude, slavery, rights and non-rights of different grades of people all fits into that concept. The base root, the right, the knowledge of having right and having no right. Good, bad, good and evil are the way they want to put it. But good and evil are abstract concepts. They mean nothing. When you put into the reality of a human society, it's rights and no rights. That's the story.